There are millions of podcasts being done all over the world that take on the personalities of their creator. Some bring in thousands of listeners each week. Some bring in large amounts of revenue, while others entertain millions and help sell products. If you're like many podcasters, you want to reach your maximum potential. But how? How do you make your podcast stand out from all the rest? Join Dr. Barrett Matthews as he talks to experts who are doing it on The Productive Podcaster. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Productive Podcaster. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews. And if this is your first time joining us here on The Productive Podcaster, I want to let you know what the show is about. Our podcast is for the podcasters out there, the people who are interested in podcasting but still have questions, and those people who are podcasters but they want a little extra edge, some tips and so forth. Because I like to let everyone know on this show that there is no cookie cutter way to do a podcast. People do them in their own way, and they get what they want out of them, and they give what they want out of them. And what I do is I bring people on the Productive Podcaster who have their own podcast, and they talk to you about what makes their podcast unique, so you can learn how to do it their way or your way, but you can pick up some tips that can help you along the way. So that's what we do here at the Productive Podcaster. Now, one thing I want everyone to do before we get started, whether you are new or whether you've been doing it for a long time, is one, I want you to subscribe to the podcast. I want to make sure that you are listening all the time to it. And I want to make sure that you are sharing this with everyone that you know right now. Let everyone know how they can be a part of the Productive Podcaster experience. And you can support us also on Patreon. We'd love to have you there. You can go on Patreon and look up the Productive Podcaster. We have some nice little perks for you just for supporting us. So now it's time for a segment we start every show with called Pros and Cons.
Pros and cons.
Now, you're probably wondering, what is pros and cons? Pros and cons is where I give you a pro podcast tip that can help you be a productive podcaster. And the tip today is on choosing good episode titles. One thing that irritates me a lot when I look at podcasts, or I look them up on the podcast sites, whether it be Apple, Google, whatever, as I see that people label their podcast episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. No. Let me tell you something. You want to give your name, give it a name, give it a title. Because when you give it a title, that makes people want to know more. I had a guy tell me a long time ago when it comes to book titles. He said, you know why people read the book title? It's because it makes them interested in reading the subtitle. And when they're interested in the subtitle, it makes them want to turn the book over to find out more about the author and what the book may be about. Same thing applies to you and your podcast. You want to have a catchy title for your podcast, and we talked about that before, but you wanted to lead them to a good subtitle, which is the title of your episode. That will make them know whether they want to listen to it or not. So that's our pro and con tip for today. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to come back with a very special guest. And I know you're saying, Barrett, you say that every week. Well, this person happens to be special because me and her, we're friends. We actually have done shows together before. And I just love her dearly. And you're going to love her, too, when I bring her on in a couple minutes. So stay right there. We'll be right back with more of the Productive Podcaster. Starting a podcast can be a daunting task. There's a lot that goes into it, and you're probably wondering if you're able to handle it. Well, why don't you just take 2 days and let us teach you how to do it at the Create Your Podcast Weekend. That's right. We're going to show you all the aspects of how to start your podcast, how to keep your podcast going, how to attract listeners, and how to make money with your podcast. CreateYourPodcastWeekend.com. Get registered right now. Let's face it, you've been talking about starting a podcast for quite some time, but you haven't started yet. Why is that? Could it be that you just don't have the time because your day-to-day keeps you so busy? Or could it be that you don't want to learn all the technical aspects that go into putting together a quality podcast? Well, at Media Boss Club, we take care of that for you. How would you like to have a done-for-you experience? That's right. At Media Boss Club, we build your podcast for you. We will edit your podcast. We will put in the music for you. We even put in commercial breaks that you can put your advertisers in. We will take care of all of the uploading to the great podcast platforms that are out there. That's right, we do everything. All you have to do is just right now go to MediaBossClub.com. That's MediaBossClub.com and let us handle the heavy lifting for you. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Productive Podcast. And once again, I'm Dr. Barrett Matthews, and I have a special guest for me today. Now, let me tell you something. I know we got a lot of women out there who listen to the show. So look, women in today's world, y'all handle a lot of challenges, probably more responsibility than any time in history. I mean, you all are called to lead families, lead companies, lead governments. But the question remains, well, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes is here to answer that question because she has a podcast called Living Life in the And I want to bring to the Productive Podcaster my dear friend, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. Dr. Barnes, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, Barrett, and just for you, even though no one else would get the context, I just got to say, eyes here, Lord.
Look, I'll give them the context. She and I used to host a morning show, a daily morning show. And we had to get going at 8 a.m. So we had to make sure everyone was there accountable at 8 a.m. to get started. So Stephanie would always say, eyes here, Lord, because it was a struggle getting up every morning to be on that show. So, and we always had to ask what was in the
morning show, and I'm not a morning person.
I'm not either. And here's a little tip for you, Stephanie. I got up probably 20 minutes before the show.
Yeah, I was probably about 5 minutes behind you.
Yeah, I'm like, people say, "Oh, y'all got so much energy in the morning," and I'm like, "It's when and just like a podcast, when you're on, you're on.
You're on, yeah.
You're right." And see, that's the thing. Dr. Stephanie Barnes and I, we know how to put on the show, so that's what we do. So, and speaking of putting on the show, your podcast, Living Life in the And, talk about that.
All right. Well, this is a project that has been in the works now, I guess, for about 4 years.
Really?
It started with a speech, actually, that I gave in New Delhi, India. So this concept originated from around the world. And actually, before that, I wrote a piece in the Huffington Post, and It was reflecting on my years at Harvard Law School and the challenges I had had being a professional, being an attorney, being a wife, mother, all these different things. And I coined the term living life in the and. Wrote this piece about it in the Huffington Post, did a speech about it in New Delhi, and it has grown from there over the years. And living life in the and is about choosing not to put yourself in a box, because a lot of times we think we need to choose this or that. We can be a wife or a career woman. We put all of these limitations on ourselves, but really, we just need to live life in the and. And that doesn't mean you can have it all at once, but you can have it all if you come up with the right plan. So the podcast is Living Life in the And for the woman who wants to get everything she effing deserves. And I focus on practical tips, practical strategies, because I'm a strategist at heart. And you don't get everything you desire. You don't get everything you effing deserve unless you put your mind to it, you put a plan to it, and you put some action behind it. So that's what the podcast is all about.
I love it. Now, it's funny you mentioned something about being put in that box. I don't know if you're familiar with the billionaire radio guy, Michael Roberts, but he.
Yes.
I was at the Power Networking conference some years ago, and I was standing there talking to him, and he said something that I guess let me know why he's being there. I said to him, I said, yeah, I got it. I have to start thinking more outside the box. And he said, why are you in a box?
Yeah,
and I was like,
box.
And I said, I guess I put myself there, huh? Like, why am I in a box?
Right.
It changed my whole way of thinking.
A lot of times, we think with this whole box concept, and you just got to get that thing out the way.
Get it out the way.
Yes, get it out the way.
I stopped using that ever since then. I stopped saying that. Yes. I stopped saying that. So I said, I think differently, but I'm not in a box anymore. No,
the only box I want is a box with a gift in it. Yes, we must do boxes. Let them be Tiffany blue.
Yes, you all can tell that this is a different type of interview I'm doing, right? So this is my girl right here. I love me some Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. So about your podcast, getting it started. You remember when you got So that's it. See, I saw your eyes roll just now. So tell me about some of those experiences.
Well, I'll say this. On the one hand, there are all of the technical aspects, getting your equipment, figuring out the title and all of that. But honestly, I think for most people, and I know for me, it was just getting up off my behind and doing it, because this is an idea that I've had for really 2 years doing the actual podcast. Because, of course, doing the morning show really was a joy for me. I love conversations and
we had fun. We had fun.
Yes, it was fun. And it was for a purpose. I love conversations with a purpose. I ain't in no small talk. Yeah. I want to have a conversation for a purpose. And that's what podcasting is all about. And so I have had all these great things that I've wanted to share, but, thinking about exactly what I wanted to call it, because it was called something else before. It has gone through some iterations. And then finally I came back to what it is I truly want to accomplish. Right. And that is to help women live their lives in the end. So just going ahead and doing it, and beginning the process and committing to it. And now I'm having so much fun. I love producing the content. I love coming up with topics to talk about. And I really enjoy the cadence of production.
And you just brought up a whole lot of questions in my head, so I hope we have time for all of them. So first of all, do you do all of the production work yourself?
No, I do not. No, I
Neither
don't.
Do
because, right, one of the things that living life in the end requires is for you to understand what you're good at and what you're great at. I am great at producing content. I am not great at producing a podcast. So I know that is something that I require expertise on. So I have someone who helps me.
There you go. That's smart. Now, as far as the content, you said you're great at producing content. What would you say to that person that doesn't feel they're great in producing content?
Well, think about if you could have people come over to your house or sit across you in a coffee shop. Well, right now, we're wearing masks. Maybe it's virtual, maybe they're on a Zoom. But anyway, if you think about it, if you wanted to have a conversation with someone and you wanted to tell them something that's going to have impact, just have a conversation. And that's one of the great things I love about podcasting is its informality. You're really having conversations, because some podcasts are like us, where it's 2 or more people, they're talking. Some are where they're talking to themselves. This is a great forum where you can talk to yourself and get away with it. Yeah.
Nobody calls you crazy.
Right. Nobody calls you crazy. So like on my podcast, I have 3 different formats. Okay. I have a format where I call them Musings from the Mind of Dr. SDB. So it's me basically sharing a thought about something. It's got a point, but it's just me talking. Right. And then there are other instances where I actually have somebody that I am interviewing. I have a Conversations, Libations, and Revelations segment where it's a conversation, because I always got the head of libations. I know you caught that, didn't you, Barry?
I always ask you what's in the cup.
Your girl always got the head of libations. But it is a lively way of discussing serious topics. Yeah. And then I have all of this really started with a research project where I desire, I'm very intentional about my words. I don't just want to do it. I desire to eventually interview 100 women, and there are 10 questions I want to ask because there is a point of understanding the concept of fulfillment across the spectrum of women. So over, I don't know how many years, it was supposed to be 1 year, now it's 2, maybe it's 3 or 4. I don't know. At some point I get all of my 100 women interviewed. But again, it has a point. And so just think about, if you wanted to share information, if you wanted to tell someone something or make an impact, how would you do that? Would you talk to yourself? Because again, this podcast allows you to do.
Yeah.
Do you want to engage others and have conversations like what we're doing here? Mm-hmm. There are just so many different ways that you can deliver content. But the most important thing is recognizing that you have something important to say and getting it out there.
Now, is your podcast strictly audio, or is it audio and video?
It's just audio. It's just audio.
So no one gets to see what's in the cup.
Right. Nobody. Because Barrett was always trying to figure out what was in my cup.
Don't know. I still don't know.
And so, I just had to tell him, keep your nose out of my cup. you don't need to worry about that. Worry about yourself.
Yeah.
But no, right now it is only audio. The first version of this was, like I said, this is the second version of my podcast. Mm-hmm. The first version was video that I converted to audio. Okay. And I enjoy both, honestly. Yeah. I enjoy both. They have their, the great thing about audio only is it makes it convenient. People don't have to, women, because, we got to get our hair did, our outfit together, right? Yeah. And with audio, it just makes it easier.
It does.
But I do love the video because you get to see the interaction. Yeah. And
I know, Russell Brunson with ClickFunnels, he did a podcast for years driving in his car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing, right. It's however you want to do it. And that was his shtick, so to speak. Yeah. People begin to expect that. So, you don't have to be perfect. It's all about just good content. Because if it's great content, people are going to listen.
And I think y'all can tell if you're listening right now that she has great content. First of all, this is her all the time. I just want you to know this is her all the time. Even early in the morning, this is her in the morning. She is just a lively, lovely person. I can't get enough of her. I feel bad because we haven't been in touch like we had been before. So I'm just glad to have her here. That's my girl right here. So when it comes to the followers or the listeners of your podcast, how did as far as the audience building, how did you go about that?
Well, this is somewhat of an organic process in that, I have people that have been following me in other contexts or other media rather. And now they're switching over to hear me on hear my podcast, and also, doing the standard marketing that you do, sharing the information on social media. And, as I grow, I will begin to get additional sponsors and just make sure that, people who can benefit from it, are aware of the value and that I'm partnering with the right people that will get that value out there. Okay. So now also, does your show, do you have sponsorship? Not yet. That's what I'm working on next. Because this version of my podcast is in its infancy. So like I said, this is round 2 of the process. So I'm building it back up again.
Gotcha. Okay. Now what would you say throughout all the podcasts, what would you say has been your biggest challenge in doing it?
Well, I think really the biggest challenge was just getting started and getting my system. And because one of the things that I didn't want to do was to be inconsistent. I wanted to make sure that I had consistent content.
That's powerful.
And so, I believe life doesn't always go as planned, but it always goes exactly as it should. So even though literally this time last year was when my podcast was supposed to debut, but life got in the way and had some illnesses and just couldn't quite get it together. But the good thing about that is it allowed me time to really build up the content and build up ideas for content. And now it's just a matter of executing it. So I would say, getting the system that will allow consistent production, consistent content That's the hardest thing, because especially once you build an audience, you don't want them just kind of hanging out there like, okay, where'd she go?
Now, do you do stuff to engage with your audience?
Yes. So, just you mentioned the topics or the names of them, because, I'm a little saucy anyway, I can push the envelope just a little bit. So I always, just a little bit, I always use topics that pique people's interest. So like the last episode, the one before that, the most recent one was called WAP, Lori Harvey and the Song of Solomon. So yeah, I know. And it has a point. Barrett is coming.
I know it does, honey. I know it does.
No, but aren't you interested? Don't you want to know
interested.
what Lori Harvey and the Song of Solomon have in common? Yeah, you do.
Definitely. That's and if you ever wondered why I love her. So that's wow, I'm gonna have to go listen to that one. But everybody, first of all, before I let her go, I want to make sure that you all go and subscribe right now to Living Life in the End with Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes, because you're going to love her just as much as you probably love her right now, as much as I do, because it's fantastic. But I want you to tell them where they can find your podcast.
Well, I'm on Apple Podcasts, of course, on Spotify, and on Amazon. That's where I've started, and eventually I will get to other places. Oh,
you will. I know that. And you're going to get those sponsors too. I know that's coming.
Yes.
Maybe a libation sponsor, just saying.
Yes. Because, libations is always a part. I believe in the spirits. You need to have your spirits with you. Come on. Come on, Barrett.
He leaves me speechless so often. So. So guess what, guys?
I'm like a box of chocolates. I'm like a box
never know what you're going to get. Never.
It's going to be good, though.
It's going to be good. That is true. Okay, we're going to take a break right here, but she's not going anywhere because she's going to be right back for our next segment, guys. But I want to thank Dr. Stephanie Barnes for hanging out for this segment. So we'll be right back with more of The Productive Podcaster. Why should you contact Media Boss Club right now? Well, because you can get a podcast done for you. You can learn all the aspects that go into putting together a great podcast and have someone else do it for you. That's right. We will build your podcast around your content and make it so you can concentrate on the money-making activities of your business. Contact MediaBossClub.com. That's MediaBossClub.com today, and let us get your podcast started right now. How are you going to learn everything you need to know about starting a podcast? Well, at the Create Your Podcast Weekend, we put it all in 2 days and help you get your podcast going by next week. That's right, by next week. All you have to do is come to the Create Your Podcast Weekend and let us show you how to get your podcast up and running. We will show you how to attract listeners. We will show you how to get people to pay you for your products and services. What products and services? The products and services we show you how to create, all at the Create Your Podcast Weekend. All you have to do is go to createyourpodcastweekend.com and get registered today. And we have special bonuses. Some of you will even get us to give you the equipment to start your podcast. That's right. We're going to give some of you the podcasting equipment to get started. Go to createyourpodcastweekend.com. That's createyourpodcastweekend.com and get started on your podcast by next week. It's time to be a boss, a media boss. If you're in business for yourself, it's time that you get your message out, and podcasting is the best way to do it. Let us create a done-for-you podcast experience with Media Boss Club. All you have to do is go to MediaBossClub.com and we'll create a done-for-you podcast right now. That's MediaBossClub.com. So welcome back to the Productive Podcast, everybody. As I told you, she was fantastic. Now all of you love her. Don't y'all leave my show and just all be with her. But you can still do both. You can listen to both. So, but make sure you check out Living Life in the Am with Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. And guess what? She is still here. She is here with us because she's going to go over our next segment, which is called PodQuest.
PodQuest.
Now, what is PodQuest? PodQuest is where we take an audience question, someone who has written in a question to us, and we're going to answer that. Before we get to the question, I know y'all think, well, how come I don't get my question answered? Well, you have to submit your question on our Facebook group. What's the Facebook group? The Productive Podcaster. Go ahead and go to our Facebook group, submit your question, and engage. Now, you can't just put a question there without engaging with us. So join in some conversations. Let us know you're out there. To do that, and then we may decide to bring your question up here and talk about it. So the question today is, how do I find my demographic? So I'm going to let Dr. Barnes handle that first. How do I find my demographic?
Well, that is something that's so important because you're not talking to everyone. You are talking to your people. And when developing the content, just thinking about what I wanted to do with my podcast, I really imagined the girlfriend sitting across the table from me that I was having this conversation. So I know her name, I know her age, I know where she shops. I did the whole avatar about the women that I wanted to address. Mm-hmm. Now, does that mean that women that don't fit that avatar, or men for that matter, won't subscribe or won't like to listen to my podcast? No, it doesn't. But that is the target audience. And so I think a lot of times we try to be there for everybody, and we have to be very specific because that will drive the content we develop, and it will drive the kind of marketing we do and the kind of engagement we have. You'll catch people on the outsides of your specified demographic, but you gotta have your persons in mind. So I say have like three girlfriends. It's 3 different types that I'm thinking about every time I produce content.
I love it. And I agree with you. The thing is, it's kind of like you can't think about your demographic as you're talking to the marketplace. Think from the marketplace. Who is it? What, like just like she just said, who is that person? Who is that avatar? I mean, and what I would do is I would write it down. What characteristics, what qualities do they have? And then, I mean, I'm talking about age. I'm talking about income. I'm talking about where they live. I'm talking about, do they have a family? All that. Do they have a dog? Where do they shop? Who do they hang out with? All of these things, because that's going to tell you who the people are. Now, I am a strong advocate for running ads that attract people to your podcast. And you can specify those ads to that market. Now you've written it down, you know who they are. You know all of the things they like, all their interests, and just market to those people. Those are ways to do it. Now, some people that feel, I don't have money to run ads. Yes, you do. It doesn't have to cost you a whole lot of money. Doesn't have to. You can put something out there and boost it on Facebook for $5. So you do have it. You just didn't know where to send it, but that's what I would do. I would just write it out and do that. So that is the answer to how do you find your demographic. Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes, I want to thank you once again for joining us here on the Productive Podcaster. Please, once again, tell them where they can find your podcast.
Well, you can go to Apple. You can go to Spotify, and I am on Amazon. So make sure that you look for Living Life in the And, for the woman who is determined to get everything she effing deserves. And you can, always search for me, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes.
Please do, guys. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Make sure you guys are always listening and sharing it with everyone else. So, Dr. Barnes, thank you so much for joining us. And guys, guess what? It is time for our next segment of the show. And y'all are wondering, what is the next segment of the show, Brett? Well, the next segment of the show is the podcast profile, where I have listened to a podcast, and I think you guys may be interested in listening to it as well. And that podcast is called 15 Minutes of Freedom by Ryan Niddell. Just listen to it. You may like it, you may not. But I just listened to it, and I thought it was some interesting content. 15 Minutes of Freedom with Ryan Niddell. I think you guys might check it out. Now, it's also time for the podcast giveaway on the Productive Podcaster. Today, I'm giving an audio copy of my best-selling book, which is called Why Didn't You Get It Done? So I'm giving an audio copy of the book, and that goes to Tina Frizzell Jenkins. And once again, they're wondering out there, how do I get something free? Well, you can get something free by, once again, joining our Facebook group, The Productive Podcaster, and make sure that you are engaging with us and we may call your name as well. So we come down now to the last part of the show. The last part of the show is where I give you a nice productive quote, because this is the Productive Podcaster. And today's quote, once again, comes from Sunday at Elijah. And today's quote is, always evaluate and determine the product of your life. Woo! Always evaluate and determine the product of your life. Do you know that your life is putting out a product? So you better make sure that you always evaluate and determine what that product is. So that is our quote for today. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes, for joining us. I also want to thank you for paying attention to us. And I want you to share. Let everyone know you are listening to the Productive Podcaster. Make sure you check us out on Patreon as well. If you want to support the show, you can get some nice little perks and gifts we have to give away for you guys just for doing that. So once again, as I always say before I leave, don't just settle for being awesome. Set your goal to all them all. And take action, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Productive Podcaster. Thank you for joining us on the Productive Podcaster. Be sure to join us next time for another great show. We welcome your engagement, so make sure you participate by joining the Productive Podcaster Facebook group and chime in. Also, share the Productive Podcaster with some of your friends right now. If you have a podcast and you're looking for guests, or if you would like to be a guest on a podcast, join our podcast exchange at www.podcastworlddirectory.com. We'll see you next time.